A shocking proposal, a contract that challenges morality, and a secret capable of changing everything. What happens when a young widow and an emotionally isolated millionaire find themselves entangled in a plot full of twists, lies, and impossible choices? Get ready to uncover an ending no one saw coming. Amid complex surgeries and waiting rooms, William Carter stood out as one of the best surgeons of his generation. He was the kind of person who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders yet never let a single crack show. His past shone brightly on his resume but hid deep scars. The most painful of these was the accident that had stolen something no amount of money could buy: the ability to become a father. Despite his wealth and status, the mansion he lived in was nothing more than an empty echo, reflecting the solitude of a man who sought to fill the silence with relentless work. Meanwhile, a few neighborhoods away, Ava Evans lived a completely different reality. Her world revolved around two small pairs of eyes that looked up at her with unwavering trust: her children. Ava was the epitome of resilience. Widowed at 27, she endured grueling work hours to put food on the table and pay overdue rent. Her humble home was filled with love, but every wall told a story of sacrifices and sleepless nights. Despite her exhaustion, she never let despair take over, keeping hope alive for better days. To William, life was an equation to solve. He saw problems as challenges requiring logic and strategy, never emotion. But lately, the void within him had been growing, a restlessness no surgical procedure could cure. His methodical coldness masked a soul that, although hardened, still longed for something even his brilliant mind couldn't achieve alone. Though he refused to admit it, the silence in his house was beginning to suffocate him. Ava, on the other hand, didn't have the luxury of indulging in deep reflections. Her focus was on surviving the present and ensuring her children had a dignified childhood, even with limited resources. The piled-up bills on top of the fridge seemed to mock her, but Ava stood firm. Deep down, she knew her children were her strength, and every one of their smiles was a reminder that the sacrifice was worth it. Fate seemed determined to intertwine their paths. In such a vast world, where Ava barely had time to dream and William was trapped in his ivory tower, it was hard to imagine them ever meeting. But something, perhaps the invisible force of the universe or a coincidence orchestrated by chance, was about to change everything. Every step Ava took toward her next shift and every distant gaze William cast at his shelf of awards brought them closer, even without their knowledge. There was something deeply human about their struggles. William, with all the money in the world, seemed incapable of reaching happiness. Ava, on the other hand, proved daily that happiness was a choice, even in the toughest circumstances. They came from opposite worlds but carried a similar restlessness within. It was as if both were walking down the same dark hallway, searching for a light that stubbornly refused to appear. And it was precisely when they least expected it that the first thread of connection emerged. A rainy night, a destiny intertwined by forces neither of them understood. Ava, exhausted after a long day, and William, in an obstinate search to fill the void he carried. Little did they know that night would mark the beginning of a story that would change their lives forever. William didn't know it, but something inside him was already starting to question. Why, with everything he had, did happiness seem so distant? At the same time, Ava wondered how far she could go to offer her children a better future. Their worlds, so different, were about to collide in a plot full of twists no one could foresee. But who would have thought a single encounter could change everything? Their pasts would begin to surface like specters, bringing truths, lies, and unexpected revelations. Between William's mansion and Ava's humble home, the stage was set for a story blending despair, hope, and, above all, transformation. It was a night when the sky seemed to weep in torrents, reflecting William's inner turmoil. He drove through the city streets aimlessly, as if the sound of his tires on the wet pavement could drown out the emptiness within. That was when he saw Ava for the first time. Under the flickering light of a street lamp, she struggled to hold a broken umbrella while carrying grocery bags and shielding her children from the rain. Something about that scene, perhaps her determination in the face of adversity, made him stop the car. And there, amid the sound of the storm and Ava's wary gaze, he glimpsed the opportunity he had been searching for. William knew what he wanted, and he was the kind of man who rarely hesitated. After learning Ava's story, the idea began to take shape. She was strong, resilient, and, above all, desperate for a chance to change her children's lives. He devised a proposal that, to him, seemed like a logical arrangement. Ava would carry the embryo he had frozen years ago, and in return, he would provide financial security and stability for her and her children. In his view, it was an agreement with no room for emotions or ambiguity. Ava froze when William laid out his idea. The proposal seemed like something out of a strange movie, something she never imagined hearing in real life. "You want me to be some kind of surrogate?" Her words came out hesitant, almost incredulous. William's calm and rational tone only made it more surreal. He spoke as if he were closing a business deal, not proposing something that would shake the core of her morality and emotions. In the days that followed, William's proposal lingered in Ava's mind. The money, of course, was tempting. Paying rent on time, buying new clothes for her children, offering a life free from the constant weight of financial uncertainty, it was a hard idea to ignore. But at the same time, she felt invaded, as if she were betraying something deep within herself by even considering the offer. It was a choice between her children's future and the values she had always held dear. William, on the other hand, believed he had made the perfect choice. Ava was the ideal candidate. He had researched other options, but none seemed as promising. He acknowledged his coldness and knew many would consider him insensitive, but for him, it was all a matter of efficiency. He needed someone who could fulfill the role without emotional complications. However, what he didn't realize was that his proposal was opening wounds he didn't even know he had. Ava tried to seek advice, but who could understand something like this? Even her closest friends, if they knew, would probably be shocked. She avoided looking at her children while pondering the proposal. She felt that, somehow, she was failing as a mother even to consider it. But every time she saw their eyes shining with hope, reality hit her again. What would truly be best for them? For William, the weight was uncomfortable. He wasn't used to dealing with uncertainty, especially with people who needed time to decide something. However, there was something about Ava that intrigued him. It wasn't just the strength she displayed. It was the way she looked at him, as if she saw a man beyond the successful millionaire everyone else saw. And that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. The decision seemed imminent yet increasingly complicated. Ava began to see William's proposal not just as a means to an end but as a moral and emotional dilemma that could change everything forever. Meanwhile, William started to realize that perhaps he was asking for more than just a favor. Perhaps, unknowingly, he was asking for something he himself wasn't capable of giving in return. And so, two opposite worlds were about to intertwine in a journey neither had ever imagined living. But deep down, the question still lingered. How far was Ava willing to go to protect her children? And could William handle the consequences of his carefully calculated plan? The stage was set, but the ending was far from predictable. William's proposal echoed in Ava's mind like distant thunder. That night, while her children slept in the small room next door, she sat at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of bills as if searching for answers between the lines. The idea of accepting something so invasive seemed absurd. Who in their right mind would agree to such a thing? But the promise of stability for her children was equally irresistible. Even so, Ava shook her head, as if trying to push the possibility away. No, she couldn't accept it. She couldn't become someone who would so easily abandon her values. William, on the other hand, began questioning whether he had gone too far. He wasn't known for showing doubt, but Ava's initial reaction left him unsettled. He mentally replayed every detail of their conversation, trying to pinpoint where he had gone wrong. It wasn't just about money, he knew that. Something about the way Ava looked at him, with a mix of disbelief and pain, struck a chord within him. It was as if she had seen something in his proposal that he hadn't considered, and this feeling unsettled him more than he was willing to admit. Ava tried to ignore the proposal in the days that followed. She buried herself in double shifts, cleaning offices and serving tables at a cafe, but the idea kept haunting her. Every smile from her children, every worn-out pair of shoes she couldn't replace, every moment they asked for something simple she couldn't provide, All of it seemed to push her back to that moment when William confronted her with a possibility both absurd and tempting. But how could she face her reflection in the mirror if she said yes? In his impeccably organized mansion, William also couldn't shake the sense of failure. He had always been a man of certainty, but now he felt his life slipping out of control. The mansion, once a symbol of his success, now felt like a glass prison, sterile and lifeless. He tried to justify his proposal as an act of logic and reason, but deep down, he began to wonder if he was truly ready for what came with the decision to become a father. Could he, with all his coldness, truly care for someone other than himself? Ava started questioning whether her refusal was an act of courage or fear. At night, while her children slept, she wrote in the journal she had kept since her husband's death. There, she tried to organize her thoughts, as if the words could help her find clarity. But the pages offered no answers, only more questions. How far was she willing to go for those she loved? And did accepting William's proposal mean betraying her husband's memory or protecting her children's future? Meanwhile, William remained trapped in his methodical routine, but something inside him began to shift. He started leaving the hospital a bit earlier, driving aimlessly through the city streets as if searching for something he couldn't name. Every corner seemed to remind him of Ava, of that rainy night and the resolute look she had given him. It was frustrating because he couldn't understand why it bothered him so much. He, a man of clear decisions, now found himself entangled in doubts. Ava knew she needed to make a decision, but every time she leaned toward one side, something pulled her back. Her mind told her it was madness, but her heart faltered at the thought of what her children could gain. William, on the other hand, tried to rationalize his persistence. Why did he feel he needed Ava for this? There were other options, but none seemed to make sense anymore. Perhaps it was the way she, with so little, seemed to carry a strength he himself lacked. And so, both remained trapped in their own uncertainties, like two sides of the same coin. While Ava wrestled with her morality, William began to confront something he had avoided for years, his own emotions. Fate seemed determined to keep them on the same board, poised for a move that would change everything. But who would take the next step? And how would they face the consequences? Ava was at the playground with her children when the weight of her decision hit her again, this time with an almost physical force. As she watched them play, every laugh and joyful glance was a cruel reminder that she would do anything for them. But did anything mean accepting William's proposal? It felt like a battle was raging in her mind, and she couldn't decide which side would win. What Ava didn't realize was that the answer was right there, in the purity of the love she felt for her children, a love that would guide her even in the darkest moments. William, on the other hand, began to realize he needed something more to move forward. He sought answers in his usual rituals of control, reviewing contracts, checking medical procedures, but nothing brought relief. It was during a casual conversation with Mrs. Mitchell, his retired nanny, that a spark of clarity emerged. "Sometimes, what you need isn't logic but courage," she said, with the simple wisdom of someone who had lived a long life. Her words echoed in William's mind, forcing him to reconsider his methodical approach to dealing with Ava. That same night, Ava reread old letters her husband had written before he passed. He used to say that even in darkness, love had the power to light the way. The words made her cry, but they also reignited something within her. Perhaps accepting William's proposal wasn't a betrayal of her husband's memory but an act of love for her children. She wasn't ready to decide yet, but now she had a new perspective, something that helped her see beyond her fear. William also began questioning what he was truly seeking. It wasn't just a child, he knew that now. It was something deeper, something he wouldn't admit out loud, the chance to connect with someone genuinely. Being around Ava and her children was slowly breaking down his barriers, even though he tried to resist. He started to see that perhaps, just perhaps, his relentless pursuit of control was keeping him from what truly mattered. Ava began opening herself up to the idea, but not without doubts. She found an unexpected mentor in her neighbor, an older woman who always seemed to have the right words at the right time. "You're not betraying anyone by trying to create a better life for your children," the neighbor said. "What matters is what you do after. That's where you show who you really are." Those words helped Ava understand that whatever choice she made, she would need courage to face the consequences. William, too, was pushed toward deeper reflection. He began remembering his own childhood, how his parents had always been cold and distant, treating him more like a project than a son. Perhaps that was what he feared, repeating the cycle. But at the same time, the idea of building something different, of creating a real family, drew him in. It was an uncomfortable thought but no less powerful. While Ava tried to find her strength in the love for her children, William began to realize he needed to confront his vulnerability. Both were being guided by forces they didn't fully understand, yet these forces pushed them in the same direction. The path wasn't clear, but there was something undeniable in the small connections forming between them. They found themselves at a crossroads, each uncovering pieces of wisdom in unexpected places. Ava, in the words of a husband she still loved. William, in the simplicity of his interactions with Mrs. Mitchell. Both knew that the decision they would make would change not only their lives but also the lives of everyone around them. The question was, were they ready to take the next step? As the doubt lingered, the universe seemed to conspire to bring them even closer. And as time passed, it became clear that neither could move forward alone. Perhaps it was fate, or perhaps it was simply the beginning of something far greater than either of them could imagine. On the morning Ava finally crossed the gates of William's mansion, her heart tightened in her chest. The house was stunning, with immaculate gardens and windows that reflected the sunlight like mirrors. But to Ava, it felt less like a new home and more like an unknown, intimidating territory. With her children clinging to her hands, she took a deep breath and stepped forward. Each click of her shoes on the polished floor echoed her decision. It was done. There was no turning back. William greeted her formally, almost coldly as expected. He led Ava through the corridors like a host showing a luxury hotel. "This will be the boys' room, here is the kitchen, and this is your suite," he said, never crossing the line of politeness. Ava felt uneasy, like a visitor in her own life. Her children, however, were in awe. They ran through the space laughing, and for the first time in a long while, Ava saw a lightness in them that made her doubt her choice less. The first days were a mixture of wonder and tension. While Ava's children quickly adapted to their new reality, playing in the garden and exploring every corner of the house, Ava felt stifled by the conditions of the contract. She remembered William's words, "Our relationship will be strictly professional." And every time he walked past her with a composed posture, never relaxing his expression, it was as if he reaffirmed that invisible boundary between them. For William, Ava's and the children's presence brought an unexpected chaos to his routine. He, who had always lived in a meticulously controlled environment, now dealt with laughter echoing through the halls, toys left on expensive rugs, and an energy he didn't know how to handle. Although his mind told him to maintain his distance, he couldn't help but observe the small moments of joy the children brought to the house. There was something inexplicable about how, even in its disorder, it felt right. Ava, on the other hand, felt the weight of the contract more and more. Despite being surrounded by comfort, there was an emptiness that tormented her. Her relationship with William was as rigid as the lines on the paper she had signed. But when she looked at her children and saw the happiness on their faces, she clung to the certainty that she was doing this for them. Still, every night before falling asleep, she wondered how long she could keep up the facade. An unexpected moment unfolded on an autumn afternoon. William came home earlier than usual and found Ava and the children in the garden, attempting to assemble a puzzle. He stood at a distance, watching. For a brief moment, he felt something he didn't immediately recognize: belonging. Though he chose not to join them, he realized his resistance was beginning to wear down, like a fortress weathered by years of storms. For Ava, the mansion was starting to feel familiar, but not comfortable. She knew she was there as part of an arrangement, not as someone who truly belonged. Yet small gestures from William, an unexpected kind word or the rare smile he directed at her children, planted a seed of something she couldn't quite explain. Perhaps there was more to this man than the calculated coldness he displayed. Days turned into weeks, and both William and Ava began to notice changes within themselves. He, faced with the chaos of children, found himself challenged to relinquish his iron grip on control. She, observing the layers beneath his facade, started to see the man behind the contract. Each of them, in their own way, was crossing a threshold they never imagined. But the contract was clear, and time marched on. Ava knew she would eventually have to face the consequences of her decision. William, on the other hand, was starting to realize he might be asking too much of someone who had already lost so much. The balance between them was fragile, and the next step would inevitably change everything. Life in William's mansion began to settle into a new rhythm, though not without its challenges. Ava felt that, despite its grandeur, the house carried an oppressive energy. Every impeccably clean hallway seemed to judge the mess her children brought, and she found herself in conflict with the unspoken rules permeating the environment. The children, however, were pure adaptability. To them, the mansion was a playground full of mysteries and possibilities. But Ava knew the real challenge lay ahead, dealing with William. William, for his part, was unaccustomed to the chaos that now filled his life. Toys scattered across expensive rugs and the constant sound of children's laughter were so far removed from his reality that he didn't know how to react. Yet, amid the discomfort, he found himself increasingly intrigued. The children were unlike anything he had ever known, authentic, unfiltered, and blissfully unaware of his usual cold demeanor. They began pulling him into a world where control was no longer the priority. Despite the rocky start, Ava found an unexpected ally in Mrs. Mitchell, William's former nanny who now worked as the household's caretaker. Warm and perceptive, Mrs. Mitchell offered kind words and simple gestures, like leaving a cup of tea in Ava's room when she seemed overwhelmed. For Ava, her presence was a balm, a reminder that she wasn't entirely alone in this journey. But the true enemies weren't people, they were the traumas both carried. William, perhaps without realizing it, was haunted by a childhood filled with emotional distance. He struggled to cope with the vulnerability creeping into his moments with Ava and her children. Ava, despite her apparent strength, bore the weight of a past marked by loss and the relentless pressure of being the foundation for her kids. These silent shadows threatened to sabotage any possibility of connection between them. One afternoon, while helping Ava's children build a cardboard playhouse in the garden, William found himself smiling without realizing it. It was the first time Ava saw him let his guard down, even if just briefly. She didn't comment, but she tucked the moment away as a sign that there might be more beneath his rigid exterior. However, moments later, William reverted to his usual cold demeanor, as if the smile had been a mistake to be corrected. Ava sighed, realizing there was still a long way to go. Yet, their shared living situation began to create small cracks in the walls William had built over the years. He discovered a surprising enjoyment in teaching the children small things, assembling a model plane or explaining how a tool worked. These moments caught him off guard, but they were undeniable. Ava, too, despite her attempts to maintain distance, began to see in him a quiet effort to connect, however tentative it might be. The weight of the contract lingered as a constant reminder of what bound them. Ava often found herself looking at her growing belly, imagining what life would be like when the twins arrived. She knew she was growing more attached than she should, and the thought terrified her. Yet, she also noticed that her children saw something in William she couldn't fully grasp, a potential safe harbor. Despite the daily tests, the mansion began to change, not physically, but in its energy. The silence that once reigned now gave way to laughter, conversations, and even minor disagreements. It was a fragile balance, but there was something real taking root. Both William and Ava started to see that, no matter how hard they tried to maintain their distance, they were being drawn into a new reality, one where their lives intertwined more each day. Ava knew she was treading dangerous territory, and William felt as though he was losing control of his own life. But amid the challenges, something deeper was emerging. Their shared experiences were not only testing them but transforming them. The question was, were they ready to confront what that meant? The day began like any other but brought with it an unexpected revelation. Ava was pregnant with twins. The news struck like lightning through the routine they had started to accept. Sitting in the examination room, Ava stared at the ultrasound screen with tear-filled eyes, hardly believing what she was seeing. Beside her, William sat in silence. For the first time, the cold and calculated surgeon seemed at a loss for how to respond. Two tiny hearts were beating inside her, each one carrying an emotional weight neither of them was prepared to face. On the drive home, the silence between them was almost tangible. William kept his eyes fixed on the road, while Ava stared out the window, lost in thought. The contract hadn't accounted for the possibility of twins, and Ava felt that this changed everything. She couldn't stop herself from growing more attached to the babies, especially now that she knew there were two. William, on the other hand, was beginning to grasp the weight of the responsibility he had taken on. These weren't just two babies, they were an entire future he was about to bring into the world, and the realization terrified him. The news of the twins was met with enthusiasm by Ava's children. They couldn't stop asking questions about what it would be like to have two babies in the house, coming up with the most absurd names as they played. Ava laughed at their suggestions, but her heart was heavy. She knew that their innocent joy came with an expiration date. Eventually, the babies would be handed over to William, and she would have to deal with the void they left behind. The thought haunted her more and more. William felt the pressure mounting as well. He spent more time in his office, poring over the contract as if searching for some clause that might offer him solace. The idea of raising two children left him restless. He had always imagined himself as an efficient father, someone who would care for a child with the same precision he used in surgery. But now, he was beginning to understand that being a parent was nothing like what he had idealized. This realization made him vulnerable in a way he had never experienced before. The relationship between Ava and William, already delicate, grew even more complex. Ava began to notice small changes in William's behavior. He seemed more attentive, more present, but still maintained an emotional barrier that frustrated her. She wanted to believe he cared, but his habitual coldness made it hard to discern what he truly felt. William, meanwhile, was being consumed by a whirlwind of emotions he didn't know how to handle. He wanted to be better but didn't know where to begin. The impending arrival of the twins brought a new dynamic to the house. William began participating more in doctor's appointments and asking about preparations for the babies, though always in a practical tone. For Ava, it wasn't enough. She felt like she was carrying the emotional weight of the entire situation alone. Yet, at the same time, she couldn't deny that William's presence during important moments was starting to make a difference. Every small gesture from him, no matter how insignificant, seemed like an attempt to bridge the gap between them. One night, as Ava prepared dinner, William walked into the kitchen, something he rarely did. He picked up a plate and started helping her chop vegetables. It was a simple gesture, but Ava noticed something shifting. They didn't talk much, but his presence in that intimate space was enough to create a small connection between them. Ava still had doubts, but moments like these made her believe that maybe, just maybe, there was hope. Over time, the twins became a constant topic of conversation between them. Ava began sharing more about her experiences as a mother, and William seemed to listen with genuine interest. Still, the contract loomed over them like a shadow. Ava knew that, deep down, William still saw the situation as a business arrangement, while she was beginning to see it as something far greater. The distance between these perspectives was a wound they would need to heal. Each day, the relationship between Ava and William grew more intricate, and the twins hadn't even arrived yet. What had started as a contract now felt like an emotional enigma neither of them knew how to solve. The future was approaching quickly, and both knew they weren't ready for what it would bring. But time wouldn't wait for them, and the hidden truths they would soon face promised to reveal much more than they were prepared to confront. The night Ava went into labor arrived with unexpected force, interrupting an illusory calm. William was at the hospital, finishing a delicate surgery, when Mrs. Mitchell called him. Her words were simple but carried immense weight. "The babies are coming." He hesitated for a moment, caught between professional protocols and something deeper. Then, a voice inside him screamed louder. He dropped everything and rushed home. For the first time, he chose heart over logic. At the mansion, Ava was doubled over in pain, not just from the labor but from the emotional weight of the moment. She looked around, trying to summon the strength to keep the promise she had made to herself, to stay strong. When William arrived, breathless and with a look of genuine concern, she couldn't hide her surprise. He seemed different. He wasn't the methodical, detached surgeon she knew. He was someone genuinely scared, someone who was there for her and the babies. The labor was long and exhausting, but William never left Ava's side. He held her hand, murmuring words of encouragement, even if they didn't make much sense. Each of Ava's cries felt like a blade cutting through him, and he began to grasp the enormity of her sacrifice. The contract, once so clear and rational, now felt like an unbearable burden. He started questioning everything, including his own ability to handle what was coming. When the twins were finally born, the room filled with a reverent silence, broken only by the baby's first cries. William held them for the first time, one in each arm, and something inside him shattered and rebuilt itself simultaneously. He felt the weight of the lives he had created, but also the immense responsibility that came with them. It was a transformative moment, one where he finally allowed vulnerability to wash over him. For the first time in years, he cried. Ava watched the scene with a mix of relief and despair. Seeing William with the twins in his arms stirred a whirlwind of emotions within her. She knew she had signed a contract, but at that moment, the thought of giving up those babies felt impossible. They were a part of her story. But how could she confront William and change the course of something that had been set in stone from the beginning? Still holding the twins, William looked at Ava. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, there were no contracts, no lies, just two people facing something far greater than themselves. He knew what she was thinking. He could see it in her gaze. And at that moment, he realized he couldn't go through with the original plan. Not after everything Ava had endured, not after witnessing the bond she shared with the babies. He was on the verge of making the most important decision of his life. The twins, so small and fragile, seemed to bring everything around them into focus. Ava felt a tightness in her chest as if time had paused. She knew something was about to change but wasn't sure if she was ready for it. William, on the other hand, was grappling with the weight of a dilemma he had never imagined facing. He wanted to do what was right, but for the first time, he wasn't sure what that meant. The silence was broken when Ava, her voice trembling, whispered, "I can't let them go." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. William took a deep breath, feeling the enormity of what was at stake. He looked at the twins again, then at Ava, and realized that his decision wasn't just about the babies, it was about something much bigger. The man he would become from that moment on was about to be born. The trial had reached its peak, and they both knew that whatever they decided in that moment would change their lives forever. The future felt uncertain, but one thing was clear, there was no turning back. They had crossed a threshold that would transform them both, whether they wanted it or not. The next morning, William's mansion felt different. It no longer carried the weight of a cold, silent house. The cries of the twins echoed through the halls, and something subtle, almost imperceptible, was shifting. William sat in the living room, holding the contract papers that had once been his guarantee of control. He glanced at Ava, exhausted but with a determined spark in her eyes. Without a word, he tore the contract into pieces, each fragment falling to the floor like a release. Ava remained silent, watching the gesture in disbelief. He didn't need to say anything. The act spoke for itself. William's decision hadn't been easy. He knew he was abandoning a meticulously crafted plan, but in that moment he could no longer see Ava and the twins as parts of an agreement. They were a family, even if the word still felt strange to him. For the first time, William set logic aside and followed his heart. He realized he didn't want to be just an owner of the twins. He wanted to be someone Ava and her children could see as part of something bigger. For Ava, William's gesture felt like a breath of fresh air after a storm. She had never imagined he would be capable of relinquishing the control that seemed to govern his life. But seeing the contract destroyed made her realize there might be more to him than she had ever thought. Still, she knew the gesture, as powerful as it was, didn't resolve everything. There was much to rebuild between them, and she wasn't ready to let her guard down completely. William began to grow closer to Ava's children, who, in turn, embraced him with the simplicity of those unburdened by the past. He taught them small things, like tying shoelaces or making a knot in a tie, but for him, each interaction was a small victory. With Ava, Their conversations grew deeper. There were still silences and hesitations, but there were also moments when they shared glimpses of their pain and hopes. The twins, fragile and dependent, became the gravitational center that pulled everyone in the house together. William spent more time with them, learning to care for them, change diapers, and even hold a bottle. Ava watched from a distance, her emotions conflicted. There was relief in not being alone, but also a vulnerability she didn't know how to navigate. She feared trusting, feared believing that this new William would stay. One afternoon, William took everyone out to the garden. He had a swing set installed for the children, something Ava would never have expected from him. As the kids played and Ava held one of the twins, William, with the other in his arms, looked at her and said, "I don't want you to leave. I don't want them to grow up without you. I want us to stay together." His words, though delivered with William's usual seriousness, carried an emotional weight that Ava felt deeply. But Ava couldn't accept his proposal so easily. She knew that for it to work, wanting it wouldn't be enough. They would need to learn how to live together, to trust, and to rebuild their ideas of family. "I'll only stay if we build something real," she replied, her voice firm, surprising even herself. William, for the first time, didn't argue. He simply nodded as if accepting the challenge. The mansion, once a symbol of isolation, began to come alive. Not just with the sounds of children but with the energy of something new growing among them all. William knew he still had much to learn, but for the first time, he was willing to try. Ava, still cautious, allowed hope to take root. It was a beginning, but one that promised more than either could have imagined. As Ava held the twins and watched her children play with William, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: peace. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, she believed it was possible to build something new. Something real. And as the sun set over the mansion, both knew this was just the first step in a journey that had only just begun. The days following the twins' birth brought a new routine to the house, but they also demanded emotional and practical adjustments from everyone. William began to realize that life with Ava and the children wasn't a puzzle to solve but a continuous learning process. He, who had always prioritized control and logic, found himself challenged to let go of certainties and adapt to the unexpected. Each morning brought a new lesson, whether in the hurried changing of a diaper or in an honest conversation with Ava about how to create a home that made sense for them all. Ava, for her part, found herself balancing the care of the twins with the struggle to find emotional stability. She still carried doubts but could see that William was changing. He involved himself in the simplest routines, from preparing breakfast to rocking the twins to sleep. Though complete trust was still a distant goal, she couldn't deny his efforts. Gradually, Ava began to lower some of her defenses, allowing herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, this new chapter could be different. The older children were also adjusting. Used to relying solely on Ava, they now had William as a constant presence in their lives. He had become someone who taught them how to ride a bike and laughed with them in front of the TV. Yet, there were moments when the silence between William and Ava created an invisible chasm. Rather than pushing them apart, these pauses forced them to look inward and confront their insecurities. A pivotal moment occurred on a quiet afternoon as Ava and William watched the twins sleep. Breaking the silence, William spoke, his voice carrying a rare honesty. "I don't know how to be good at this. I don't know what a real family looks like. But I want to try." Ava turned to him, surprised by the vulnerability in his words. For the first time, she felt he was being completely honest, no longer hiding behind facades or conventions. While that moment forged a significant connection, the road to balance remained full of challenges. William, accustomed to making quick, decisive choices, had to learn to listen. Ava, on the other hand, wrestled with the constant fear that everything they were building could fall apart. An invisible contract now existed between them, different from the one they had signed. This one built on trust, effort, and a shared desire to try something new. The mansion began transforming into something Ava had never imagined: a home. The once cold walls now echoed with laughter, small messes, and even disagreements that, though uncomfortable, were signs of a real life together. For Ava, this was both a relief and a reminder that the traumas of the past still required healing. But she was willing to face that challenge as long as William was too. As months passed, William realized that his relationship with Ava wasn't just about raising the twins. It was about creating something new for himself, something he had never experienced. He still made mistakes, and there were days when the past threatened to pull him back, but Ava and the children anchored him. More and more, he began to see that life wasn't about perfection but about finding beauty in imperfect moments. The journey back to stability was different for each of them. Ava, with her strength and resilience, slowly learned to trust again, even if cautiously. William, on the other hand, discovered that his worth didn't lie in his ability to control everything but in his willingness to embrace the unexpected. Together, they began to build a foundation that, while fragile, was genuine. One evening, as they watched the children playing in the garden, Ava and William exchanged a glance that needed no words. They both knew there was still a long road ahead, but they also knew they were willing to walk it. The past had shaped them, but the future was now in their hands. In the days that followed, changes emerged that neither Ava nor William could have anticipated. William's transformation, which had started as a timid attempt to connect, now became visible in every gesture. He was no longer the rigid, methodical surgeon Ava had first met. He was becoming someone more present, more human. For the first time, he allowed himself to fail, to learn, and even to ask for help. It was as if every moment with Ava and the children was rebuilding him, piece by piece. Ava, meanwhile, felt something blossoming within her. Having spent her life protecting and caring for her children, she was beginning to see that she too deserved more joy, partnership, and perhaps even love. But that didn't mean her fears had vanished. There were still nights when she lay awake, wondering if everything she was experiencing was real or just another fleeting illusion. Yet with each new day, William proved he was committed to earning her trust. The moment that sealed their transformation happened during a simple yet meaningful celebration. It was the birthday of one of Ava's children, and the house was filled with laughter and handmade decorations. William, who once would have stayed on the sidelines of such chaos, was at the center of it all. He helped organize games, served cake, and even sang happy birthday awkwardly. For Ava, this was more than a party. It was a symbol of everything they had built together. However, their emotional resurrection didn't come without challenges. There were times when William still retreated, trapped in his old patterns of control. And Ava, despite his changes, still felt the need to protect herself and her children from potential disappointment. These moments of tension served as reminders that healing was not a destination but a continuous process. One evening, as the twins slept and the older children played in the room next door, Ava and William found themselves in the kitchen. He was quiet, stirring tea absent-mindedly. "I'm not perfect," he said, breaking the silence. "But I want to be better. For you, for them, for myself." Ava, who had heard promises before, felt something different this time. These weren't just words. They were the declaration of someone truly committed to change. Ava responded with the honesty that had always guided her. "I don't expect perfection, William. I just need to know you're really here." The look he gave her wasn't that of a man trying to prove something but of someone who finally understood what it meant to be present. In that moment, Ava realized that both of them were being reborn, not just as individuals but as something greater than they were alone. The house, once cold and silent, now pulsed with life. It wasn't perfect, far from it. Toys were still scattered about, there were arguments over trivial things, and daily challenges remained. But it was real. And for Ava and William, that was all that mattered. They had learned that resurrection didn't mean erasing the past but using it as a foundation to build something new. As the sun rose on the horizon, illuminating the sleeping faces of the children, Ava and William felt something they hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. It wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of something uncertain but extraordinary. The months that followed brought a new rhythm to the house, one now filled with purpose and meaning. William, a man once imprisoned by his need for control, discovered something unexpected in the simplicity of everyday life: happiness. He learned to embrace the messiness of children, to laugh at mistakes, and to find beauty in small moments. Watching the twins grow under his care, they became living symbols of his transformation. To William, they weren't just his children. They were the elixir he hadn't known he needed, a second chance at truly living. Ava also experienced a rebirth in her new life. The days were still exhausting, but now they were accompanied by support and partnership. For the first time in years, she no longer felt like she was carrying the weight of the world alone. William demonstrated daily that his commitment wasn't just to the twins but to her and the older children as well. He helped with household tasks, read bedtime stories, and even learned to cook simple meals, with results that were, at the very least, amusing. For Ava, these small acts were the foundation of something that could last. Ava's older children also adjusted to the new dynamic. William, once a distant and rigid figure, had become someone they could rely on. He helped with homework, played video games, and even joined in their backyard games. To the children, William became more than just a responsible adult. He was a genuine part of their lives. And as Ava watched these interactions, she felt reassured that she had made the right decision, even when everything seemed uncertain at the start. The mansion, which had once symbolized isolation and coldness, now felt like a vibrant home. The once quiet hallways echoed with laughter, the gardens were always alive with activity, and even the neighbors began to notice the change. William was no longer seen solely as a renowned surgeon. He was a man who had rediscovered himself through family. He no longer hid behind his professional persona. Instead, he embraced each day as an opportunity to connect more deeply with Ava and the children. But the true elixir that William and Ava brought back from their journey was intangible, the understanding that love, in all its forms, is built. They learned that happiness doesn't come ready-made but is shaped in difficulties, in small moments of joy, and in the mutual willingness to keep trying. Every obstacle they had faced, from their initial fears to uncertainties about the future, had strengthened and united them. One evening, as the entire family gathered in the living room, Ava cradling the twins, and the older children nestled beside William, he looked around and finally understood what family meant. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that was more than he had ever dared to dream. Ava, noticing William's gaze, smiled. There was a serenity in that moment, as if they both knew they were exactly where they were meant to be. Their return with the elixir wasn't just a transformation for William and Ava, it was a gift they shared with everyone around them. The twins would grow up in a home full of love, the older children would have examples of resilience and courage, and William and Ava, despite their scars, had found something money could never buy, the wholeness that comes from a shared life. Their past, filled with twists, lies, and pain, now served as a reminder of how far they had come. The future would undoubtedly bring challenges, but they were ready. Together, they had found their lesson, not just in the twins, but in what they had built together. A home, a family, and above all, a new beginning.